Okay. Welcome everyone. Super excited to have this kind of ad hoc restream. We have two special guests today, Maria from Electric Capital and Harry from HackWest. And I would say let's get it started. So this session is all about the Electric Capital Developer Report. And for everybody that is kind of hearing us, you're probably like a builder, a developer, you're building your dApp. You probably even saw and you read the report. And the goal really of this session is just to either deep dive, asking spicy question, also hearing from the ground with Ari and HackWest, but really mostly like, any takes that you want to kind of like, mention. But let's get it started. Let's do a quick round of intro. Maria, do we want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. My name is Maria. I'm one of the partners at a crypto-focused VC firm called Electric Capital. And every year, for 6 years now, we've been putting out this report called the Developer Report, which looks at the total number of open source crypto developers across as many cuts of the data as we can possibly manage. So we look at how many Bitcoin developers there are, how many Ethereum developers there are. We cut it in different ways, like full-time and part-time and new developers, and we can get into all of that in the stream. But yeah, my background is in engineering. I also built products and worked at my own company for a while, and so developers are near and dear to my heart. And most people at Electric have started a company as well and have an engineering background. All the partners have an engineering background, which is also why,
Nice.
For us, we started in 2018 tracking developer signals just because we always felt like that was really important.
Yeah, I think it's super relevant. This like, I think builders and developer in the ecosystem are extremely important, kind of like
Yeah.
trends. And also like I really appreciate like a fund like doing these reports because you guys really see also the big picture. So that's very important. Awesome, Harry, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. Great to be here. My name is Harry, one of the co-founders of HackQuest. We are a Web3 developer education platform. We help bridge the gap between the developers, the funds, the ecosystems, and essentially onboard more devs from Web2 to Web3. Part of the reasons why HackQuest was born is because of this very report. So the Electric Capital Developer Report. So it's our favorite time of the season, and happy to talk about it.
Nice. Yeah, I was always looking forward to, this end of the year report, and kind of digesting is also like sometimes hard because there are 200 plus pages. I really like appreciate you have also this dynamic report that we're showing like in a couple of like seconds. But also like I want to say, Harry, like we met a couple of years ago. You guys were running so many hackathons. That was definitely and always kind of like super impressed by the hands-on work that you're doing, not just kind of like online education. I think this is super important, especially now that we're going with more this kind of like evergreen developer activation. We need to bring also like new builders, new developers in the ecosystem, no matter in which kind of like siloed programming language they are. So I think that's really important. Okay, so just to giving a little bit like colors to this discussion, like the Electric Capital Report is huge, right? We want to pick up also some of the major parts. We want to speak a little bit what's the landscape kind of like idea for the people that maybe didn't have a read, and then also like we want to speak a little bit about what are the kind of the main theme and trends that right now for different developers in different ecosystem are running through. And then also like I think like super important to understand that we're moving a lot in this kind of like multi-chain developer user persona. And I think also understanding this flow from ecosystem to ecosystem is important. And then we get both Maria and Harry some kind of like spicy question, right? And I think that we can get started. Okay, so let's just for the people that never heard about this report, I also wanna mention like there are two ways that you can digest this information today. So we have this we have the developerreport.com where you can actually see a bunch of updated data. And correct me if I'm wrong, like Maria, like you guys are updating this constantly. And you can see different ecosystem, different kind of developer. And I really like the fact that you guys are always like kind of like dividing the verticals with kind of like full-time devs, monthly devs, total repos, and total commit. And then the other side of the medal, you have literally like the PDF report, and this is like you see a lot of like different graphs and stats, and I really like the fact that you guys break down different part of the report in different categories. And okay, so I will not give any more context, but I just want to say I think it's super important that we kind of have this constant. But let's start with one question, and probably this is for you, Maria. Like, what is kind of like the Electric Capital like kind of core thesis? That kind of also like started all this discussion about developer trends and understanding more the
Yeah.
builder situation before even like going to the founder level.
Yeah. So we firmly believe that developers are a leading indicator of value creation. And that comes from our backgrounds. That comes from the fact that, as I mentioned, we have 5 investment partners. Every single one of us has a technical background. Many of us have built our own companies and have, if not our own companies, have built large scale products. Um, and it's clear to us that developers create the tooling to bring in more developers. They create the applications to bring in users. Um, and so they are the start of any sort of value creations flywheel.
Great.
The other part of that, which is really fascinating with crypto, is that it's pretty much one of the only industries that's this large, worth trillions of dollars, where it's fundamentally open source. So Bitcoin is open source, Ethereum is open source. And so it allows you to have this unprecedented transparency into what builders are building, right? In no other industry can you kind of stroll over and say like, hey, Google, like, how many developers do you have? What are you working on? Like, what are the things you're committing? That's just not possible in most other industries, but it is possible in crypto. And so kind of taking together these two pieces, the fact
Mhm.
that we have a technical background and deeply respect developers and kind of the value that they create, with the fact that crypto is really uniquely open source, and kind of combining these two things, that's really the genesis of the report in 2018.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think it makes totally sense, and I really like also like how the thesis kind of like moving forward and align with the investment side of it. Okay, and what about like you, Harry, with HackQuest? You guys started, you got inspired by the developer report since the start, right? But how kind of like the thesis expanded on the developer education side?
Yeah, so HackQuest first started as a founders community in APAC. We just did a bunch of meetups and hackathons. Slowly, we realized that there's so many Web2 developers there. There are a lot of folks interested in the Web3 space, but there's not enough developers to build dApps, right? So I think Union Square Ventures back in 2018 published the Infra Dev Cycle, which is very interesting because we always say, oh, Web3 is in the infrastructure phase, and we still maybe in the infrastructure phase where only if we look at the top 20 market cap projects, they are 18 of which are all the L2, O1, L2s, or mostly O1, L2s. And maybe we need more developers to be able to build better products and better projects to be able to onboard more people. So the core thesis here is similarly, developer activity, developer community as a leading indicator for value creation. And we believe there needs to be a neutral player that's chain agnostic, that provides a gateway per se for developers to get onboarded to Web3, to have the educational resources, the hackathon opportunity, the grant, the financial incentive, the acceleration they need to be able to launch projects as a founder, as well as getting jobs and open source opportunities as a developer. So the core thesis is be able to build an end-to-end pipeline and be that neutral player to help more developers get on board to Web3.
Nice, nice, nice. And before we're jumping directly in the report and their teams, like Harry, is there something that if you need to define the two top highlights that you saw from the report, what those will be?
You mean from the report, like my favorite segments? Oh,
Mhm.
there's so many. I'm always looking forward to the multi-chain portion. I believe that's Electric
Mm.
Capital is one of the first ever that noticed that trend. I've noticed, folks are becoming multi-chain devs. I believe last year was like 10% of the devs were hovering around that number, and this year is 1 in 3. And we absolutely see that in our applications, in our dev community as well. A lot more, there's significantly more interest in, let's say, Ethereum developer interested in, not just building on Midnet, right? In some of the L2s, maybe an Arbitrum dev also interested in building on another L2 or even Solana, right? Like we see a lot more developers interested in contributing to other chains. That's one segment. Two is obviously a lot. We are a global community, so I'm always interested to see where the devs fall and what's the increase from each region. So it was great to see Africa climbing up, right, from I think 2%, 6%. Asia in particular from I think third place now number one. What's the US's place, right, as a whole is still number one, but the percentage wise has been declining. And third section is I also love to see the flow of developers moving from one ecosystem to another. The last one I'll mention, there are too many, is where the innovation happens. I know Electric Capital used this fingerprinting method, which kind of captures where innovation really starts, a regional contract. So those are the four of my personal favorites. I don't know, Maria, Francisco, how about you?
Oh yeah, I have so many. I just want to now hear like a little bit, Maria. Like I'm just pulling out like the table of content, right, to understand a little bit like what are the big themes. But do you want to give us quickly an overview? Like what? So kind of like how the pull up of the data, all the feeding of the data is done today, and kind of like also you want to run us through those highlights. I know like we have limited time, and you can either like run me through the report, or you can also like share as you want. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. If you flip over to slide 2, it's
Oh
the
yes.
executive summary, and I can kind of talk through, I can talk through some of those things. But um, what I always like to start off with the report is that this is only looking at open source developers. So this means any private code base is not going to be included in as a data source. Who has a private code base? Coinbase has a private code base. Binance has a private code base. Almost any crypto-based gaming company is going to have large private code bases. So all of those developers, if they don't contribute to anything open source in crypto, they will not be counted, which means that the report, any number that you see, is going to be a massive undercounting of the total number of crypto developers. That being said, open source developers are a really important trend in crypto. As I mentioned, this is a primarily open source industry. Most of the code, most of the really important pieces of code is open source for security reasons, for transparency reasons. And so the continued effort, the continued code commits into open source crypto is very, very important. And it's an indicator of the types of trends that we see, even if it doesn't indicate the total number. So maybe just really quickly, I think the overarching theme for me this year was that there is this crazy diversification happening in crypto, and it's happening at all levels. It's happening at the global level, right? So Harry mentioned Asia is now the #1 continent for crypto developers. 1 in 3 crypto developers are from Asia. That's crazy because in 2015, 82% of all crypto developers were in Europe and in North America, right? So everything has shifted, has dispersed, has become a lot more global. Individually on a country basis, that's also shifted a lot. So as Harry mentioned, US is still the #1 country for crypto developers. That being said, it's really like the share of crypto developers that the US has kind of commanded over the years is just a straight line down. And there are these countries that are increasing in developer share. So India is a huge one that comes to mind. In 2015, India was number 10 in the world in terms of developer share. Now India is number 2. Not only that, India is the biggest country for bringing in new developers. So what this is showing, showing us, having been, I guess even just me personally, I entered crypto personally in 2018. This means that crypto is getting increasingly global, and it's getting increasingly more important in emerging economies as well. Countries like Nigeria also increasing in developer share. So that's really, really cool to see that the center of gravity is shifting. Or rather, it hasn't shifted, it's just dispersed across the world. Across every single continent, so now we're talking about diversity in ecosystems. Across every single continent, Ethereum is the #1 ecosystem in terms of developer share. So most developers in every continent is working on Ethereum. And most developers in all of the top 5 countries is working on Ethereum, except for India, who's working on Solana. And Solana, and this kind of like brings to the next point of diversification, which is Solana is the #2 ecosystem in all of the continents. And Solana in 2024 had the highest number of new developers come in, which beat Ethereum for the first time since 2016. This is the first time anyone has beat Ethereum for the greatest number of new developers. And so we're starting to see kind of this shift in new developer interest as well, right? New developers. I remember interviewing developers who said, when I asked them why they worked in the Ethereum ecosystem, they said, "Oh, well, it's just that was like, I didn't even question it, right? This was the only ecosystem." And I think now we're starting to see new developers branching out, exploring new things. So that is really interesting. That being said, I think the report also shows that there's huge dominance across the Ethereum ecosystem. It's #1 across almost any measure that you look at. It has the highest number of developers. It has the highest number of full-time developers. It's biggest in TVL. But I would say the third point of diversification now is, we've talked about global diversification, we've talked about ecosystem diversification. The third type of diversification is use case diversification. And we're starting to see this introduction of low fee use cases. And low fee use cases is happening on chains outside of Ethereum mainnet. You can see, and by low fee use cases, what I mean is types of transactions where people don't want to pay almost any money for that transaction to happen. So DEX trades would be one, decentralized exchange trades. So when people are swapping tokens back and forth, they don't want to pay that much in fees to the chain. When people are minting things, minting NFTs, often this comes in the form of like minting rewards or minting badges or minting something commemorative. They don't want to pay any fees either. When people are transferring stablecoins around, often they don't want to pay very high fees. For these use cases, we're starting to see Solana and Base take off. We're starting to see Ethereum L2s really coming in to play a big role in sort of these low fee use cases as well. But there's still a lot of innovation in kind of this like this high TVL, high value use case. And so another notable point this year is the growth of LRTs or liquid restaking tokens. With kind of the introduction of EigenLayer, it kicked off an entirely new DeFi category, LRTs, which grew over 30 billion in a year. And that is all happening on Ethereum as well. And so there's a lot of kind of like these high value innovation use cases continuing on Ethereum mainnet. I'll pause there, but there's a lot of overview. But yeah, it's
I
just
definitely want to
diversity
break
across
down.
the board.
Yeah, that's super cool. I definitely want to break down some of the parts. But what do you think, like, why is that also? Do you think it's mostly like this kind of like movement is like a kind of like a TVL slash like speculation driven movement? So, or it's more like the accessibility of the ecosystem is easier for those developers. What do you think are kind of like the deciding factors to move inside an ecosystem or inside kind of like a specific layer two?
Yeah, well, what's kind of interesting about doing this report in 2024 versus like, let's say 2022, right, is that the market was not that great all through. I mean, now we're starting to see this uptick in prices, but that was certainly not the case in the beginning of the year. And so, yeah, and so I think if you'll kind of flip over to new developers, but it's actually really cool to see that in 2024, 39,000 new developers joined crypto. This is at a time when, again, only in the last month or so is crypto in the news about like, whoa, all-time highs, all that, right? But like most of 2024, crypto was pretty quiet. So despite all of that, 39,000 new developers committed open source code. Again, this is like discounting anyone who didn't push anything open source. So I would say that, that doesn't feel very speculative to me. That's like pretty interesting. These are developers who are very, has somehow stumbled into this industry, right? Despite like no news in the media. In terms of moving across to L2s, I think this I would love like Harry's input into this because I look at the data and so Harry may have some more kind of like on the ground or Francesco yourself, you might have some more on the ground anecdotes as well. But my sense is it's a where are the users, right? In terms of the type of users I'm looking for, where are those users? And then the second thing is how much does it cost to deploy a contract? And how much is the cost of experimentation? And it just so happens that on L2s, on Solana, experimentation is pretty cheap, cheaper than mainnet Ethereum. And when we're talking about more developers coming in from emerging economies, when we're talking about super young developers getting into the space, lower fees is very, very important. I remember speaking to
Yes.
a developer who started as a crypto developer in high school, and she was like, she tried to deploy a contract in 2022, I want to say, and she was like, it cost $200. I was like, where am I going to get $200? That's so many Chipotles. Like it's like crazy for people, right? To like
Yeah.
to pay for some of these fees, and so the adoption of L2s and some of these alternative L1s outside of Ethereum mainnet, I think, has a lot to do with fees as well.
That's yeah. I think fees are definitely like a kind of like a breaking decision factor. Definitely like also the availability of tooling. This is something that we're seeing a lot around
Tooling,
kind
yeah.
of advanced developer tooling or kind of like linear. Like people are really looking for like, an ecosystem of tooling. It's not just the deployment, like do you have an attestation like tooling similar to a Verex ecosystem before even deploying to linear, or even like on the MetaMask side, like having some kind of like, SDK that is allowing like seamless like connection, especially for game developers. And now we're working on this delegation toolkit. It's quite interesting. People want to see more kind of delegation like use case, but they need to have this tooling around. And I think that's some part of but for you, Ari, specific, like you as we said before, you're very kind of like also hands-on on hackathons. You see kind of directly like developers specific, like is there kind of like some I'm not saying conflict, but is there something that you see that either is fully in line with this, or is it something like you see like, oh, this is not totally true? Like what is your perception on that?
Sure. I'll start on something like one of them, probably the noteworthy, really the quotation mark winners of the 2024 race, I would say would be probably Solana and Base, right? In terms of
Yeah.
developer activity. I have a slide here. If you don't mind, I'll quickly share. That's it's kind of sourced from Grow the Pie. Shout out to the data provider as well as Solana. So to kind of show how, and this is something, there's one, the core thesis of Lecture Capital that Maria mentioned, that developer activity or developer growth, developer community as a leading indicator for value creation. We definitely see that happening across the board, even on the ground, right? At the hackathons, at local meetups, at community activities, even just on Twitter. But if we look at some of the data here, we see that, prior to the growth of TVL, prior to like the token price jumps, we already were seeing the core dev count not declining. For example, Solana, even when the prices were $9, $11, $16, the dedication to a select few teams, the pillar projects of the ecosystem of Solana, never left. I think yesterday Solana was posting a video on their Twitter capturing, this project didn't leave during the 2022, during this period, and it was the same across the board. We see the developer accessibility remains high. We see the support provided to the pillar projects in a few dedicated ecosystem projects remain very high, and that's part of the reason why the core dev count didn't really decline, and in fact, for slowly afterwards increased, which obviously propelled some of the price variances that we have seen. So that's one data point I wanted to share that we definitely see align with the DAV report. On the ground level, we also another thing I wanted to mention. Well, fees is absolutely true. Another thing I think a lot of ecosystem do very well is they have an end-to-end developer/founder pipeline for success. What that means is we tend to like to break it down into four categories. One is you have intro level developers who are new to Web3, and two, you have intermediate level of developers who are looking for an ecosystem to specialize or getting more interested. They probably know the basics and they are terminally online, but they may not have picked an ecosystem. They might be advocates for multiple, and they might have some preferences, but not yet set on one. On the third level, we call them advanced level developers slash almost advocates. At that level, they're probably identified one or two ecosystem they're more aligned with, and start contributing. And fourth are like the founders, the active contributors who are probably founding or contributing to a pillar projects. We see a lot of ecosystems do very well in the first and sometimes the last category, focusing on the very, very top funnel, as well as maybe the very last funnel. So you have accelerators, the example would be, and you might have decent documentation. You might have some resources out there, but you don't actually, a lot of the ecosystem don't focus on the middle, like which is where the war actually happens. But you see Solana and Base and so forth. Base is doing the world tour. They've been planning that for months. The community has been crazy, and Jesse and the team is always cooking on the, I would say, the second and third category. They're always on the ground. They're always replying. They're always talking to the founders directly, and we see that with Solana and some of the other recent big names, the Monet, the Mega ETH, forming a few pillar projects in the ecosystem very early on and deeply incubate, right? One come to mind would be the Mega Mafia of Mega ETH. Solana has that collection of 5 to 7 projects that have been there since the beginning. And they never stopped supporting those projects, even if the token prices were down. They never backtracked or lower the support. Those are two things I wanted to add that we have noticed.
This is super useful, Ari. I think also you're eager to kind of like share some infographics that you have been working on, but I want to prioritize always like the question in the chat and everything. And I think a familiar face is Nicole is asking here like what kind of like what type of project or use case are developers building? And this is general, and we're going back to the report, and this is something either for you, Maria, or Ari. But what do you think are those verticals that you see developer prioritize today? I have definitely like a lot of like answer on that, like being a lot on the ground. But what do you guys think on that, on the vertical side?
Yeah, well, we highlight 3 in the report itself. One is DeFi projects, huge number of developers supporting. Let's see, if you click on the magnifying glass on the lower left-hand side.
Yes, here.
Yep, there's a magnifying glass. Go to slide.
Oh, yes.
Yep, and then type in DeFi. See what happens. Yep, 141.
This one here, 141. Nice. Yep. Yeah, I think it's difficult to get all the slide
when
numbers.
You have a 200-page report in front of you, it's a little bit hard. Yeah, so DeFi is, if you go one more slide, I'll kind of show you. This is the number of developers. So 3,546 monthly active developers working in DeFi, and that's been a 26% annualized growth since the beginning of DeFi summer. DeFi is a huge use case. If you keep going, actually, we have this interesting slide on how many DeFi developers are on ETH versus other chains.
Oh, yeah.
This is another one that's really cool. DeFi developers are generally like, so the darkest green line is developers who have been working on DeFi for over 2 years. So most developers in DeFi are actually really experienced. They've been around for a long time, which is super cool. But yeah, if you keep going a few more slides, we'll have this thing on. So 53% of DeFi developers work within the Ethereum ecosystem as defined by Ethereum and its L2s. So Linea would kind of fall into this as well. The next biggest would be Solana. So Solana has the next biggest number of
It's very interesting because I would have even say that all the BTC smart contract development in the past probably 6-8 months has definitely picked up a lot. But seeing this is I feel it's less, it's more like constant, right? there are all these kind of like BitVM things happening, and I saw like was also that's some kind of like surprise for me to see like this kind of like steadiness, right? But I guess this is probably like coming.
There's been growth. This is developer share,
Uh-huh.
so which means
Nice.
that the share for Bitcoin hasn't changed, but it's
Mhm.
also because the total number of developers kind of working
Mhm.
across DeFi has been increasing
Nice.
over time. So DeFi is a big use case. NFTs is another one. People are going to be surprised to hear this, but we've kind of hit all-time highs in NFT activity. Yeah, if you type in NFTs, um, so uh, we hit, yeah, so this is really cool, right?
Yeah.
Deployments more than tripled. So when people think NFTs, they think the last market cycle. That's absolutely not true. There's actually more NFT activity than ever. It's just kind of shifted. There's a lot of creator activity and there's a lot of minting activity. Um, so um, so the transfers or kind of like trading activity continues to happen and continues to be a really, really important primitive. But the kind of sharp increases in activity have been happening in minting. And it's because the type of things people are minting now is also very different. It's not collectibles, it's not art, although that's still like a big piece of it. A lot of it is like sort of like identity badges for certain things, even like for DeFi as kind of like a receipt that you did some sort of that you locked up some assets. So the kind of definition of NFTs has expanded quite a bit since probably the last time people have really, really thought about it in 2022 or 2021. And so NFTs is a huge category. And then the last huge category we highlight here is ZK. Yeah, so you can see a lot of uh, developers happening outside of Ethereum mainnet as well. Um, so, yep, zero knowledge. There we go. So for ZK, you'll see that the absolute number pretty sizable, right? A little over 2,000 monthly active developers working in zero knowledge ecosystems. If you kind of keep flipping and look at the on-chain activity, it's small, but it's growing. If you maybe flip over a couple more, yeah. So contract deployments
Hmm.
grew from 40 total in 2020 to 639. So very small still in absolute numbers, but just kind of this unmistakable trend up. Um, and to us, just kind of across different metrics in the ZK section, the growth overall has indicated that ZK is really coming out of this deep research and is really in its application and experimentation phase. And you can see that with the number of new developers coming in and trying things out.
This is very cool, and I love like as you say, I love those insights to engage the developer ecosystem, like Vibrant, and I think those are great insights also, like because you kind of answer also with vertical specific kind of data, what are kind of builders, and I'm definitely surprised on the NFC side. I was still
Yeah.
hearing like stats about still like NFT even volume of trade is still quite high, so that's definitely not and that was even 6 months ago, right? Even before like the run now. No, that's very interesting. I think you answered already, kind of Maria, a little bit like what's the landscape of dev. Is there some slide that you want to share, like that you think is super interesting to see? Like kind of like I'm always interested around Rust versus Solidity and kind of like this
Mm.
ecosystem. Um, mhm.
Yeah, maybe the tech stack, if you just search for tech stack, that might be an interesting, yep, this one. So this is, there's a lot of like hullabaloo around Solana getting more new developers, but a lot of it is actually because developers are now working on like the EVM ecosystem rather than sometimes specifically Ethereum mainnet. So a lot of the times people will specify like 10 plus EVM chains at a time, in which case they're pushing things out into the EVM ecosystem. They're not really kind of contributing to a specific chain now. Um, but the EVM ecosystem has almost 4x more developers than any other, the next biggest ecosystem. Right now, that just happens to be SVM mostly, which is mostly Solana, because SVM is still not quite an ecosystem yet. It's burgeoning, and I'm kind of curious to see what will happen in the next 1 to 2 years. But there's just these crazy network effects around the number of developers who are working in the EVM ecosystem. And I think part of it is just, it's really easy. Like this strategy of tying everything together with Solidity, I would say has really kind of paid off. You see this network
Mhm.
effect today. And then actually, if you go one slide before, if I'm remembering correctly, yes. Okay,
Oh,
so Harry,
that's
you talked about
interesting.
multi-chain developers. 1 in 3 developers are a multi-chain developer, meaning that they're simultaneously working on multiple chains. Um, and that number has grown over time, right? The number of
Mhm.
multi-chain, it didn't always used to be this way. Now it is this way. And 74% of them work on at least one EVM chain. Again, kind of pointing to the huge network effects of EVM.
That's yeah, that's very cool. Do you think people sticking around? I mean, this is also a question for you, Harry. I know you're eager to share your slides, but I'm always understanding. I see more people bouncing from Rust and zk research on, for example, on Starkware, on parachains, and then kind of like coming back to Solidity on different things. But how do you see this like moving? I definitely see a big thesis right now that we should target. Let's say multi-chain developers that are kind of like jumping and flowing from ecosystem to ecosystem because that's depending accessibility factor, tooling factor, could be even liquidity factor because a lot of people are not deploying their dApps if there is not enough, like let's say user facing like exposure or liquidity. But where do you see kind of like devs moving? And obviously, we should not speak also about Solana core dev activity that you mentioned that, Harry. But what else do we want to share here?
Yeah, I could start as well. I think the multi-chain narrative has really not been the narrative anymore, right? I think it's just
Mhm,
been a reality
mhm,
this year. Like
Mm-hmm.
all the founders, all the developers we talked to, and this is not something, to be frank, and this might be a little spicy here. Like we talk about this in a couple of panels in conferences where ecosystem don't like to hear that devs and founders are bouncing around or like jumping around, hopping around ecosystem. But
yeah.
it's honestly a bit of a reality. Sometimes it's difficult to stay alive from a founder perspective in the current cycle. And this might also be a little spicy, but I don't think this is a cycle that's been friendly to the developers, the founders, the real
Mm,
shippers. And partly because of that, we're seeing more and more folks obviously jumping around different chains, different opportunities. They're also assessing which chain can offers them the biggest opportunity. And I think both Maria and Francisco mentioned users, right?
mhm,
To be frank, I think super important, which chain has real liquidity, which chain has real users, and
mhm,
which is why we see the Solana starting to emerge, right? And one of the data points we also saw in 2024 is as how and if you don't mind, I'll quickly share another
please.
slide. Um, as well as on, if we look at the market cap and electric capital's report to kind of take a look together, is we see a consolidation of developers and founders too. We see like moving up into the top ecosystems, and for some of the smaller ecosystems we're starting to see like more like essentially more developers and founders going into the top ecosystem because they're capable of offering more support. There are only a few that I would say have like a full end-to-end pipeline they're always supported, and they feel they can acquire users. And a big reason is there's not enough liquidity or users in a lot of the chains. So which is why we're seeing maybe they're not moving away from the original chain they're deployed on, but they want to capitalize on the liquidity and the users that the biggest names offer. So there's an increasing need for multi-chain tools and multi-chain education, which is also part of the direction we are going for as to how do we quickly enable users and developers, founders to learn and also start building on a new ecosystem. But obviously, I think on the flip side, understanding each ecosystem will always be focusing on a few like pillar projects like the Solana has been doing, and the Mega Ether Monad has been doing. So I think for developers and founders, myself, I think looking at the both sides are important. Multi-chain has a lot of opportunities, but in the meantime, dedicating to one ecosystem or a few
mhm.
ecosystems also have its advantages.
Nice, nice. I just want to share this part. This is the dynamic dev report, right? And I really like this part. Maria, like remind us, like so established dev versus kind of like total devs. Like, is there
Mhm.
some of the highlights speaking kind of like multi-chain developers that I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting here.
So full-time devs is the first column that you encounter, and that's because in our view, full-time devs is probably one of the most important signals you can look at, right? Actually,
Mhm,
not maybe not even new developers. It's just a
mhm.
different signal. But full-time devs is any developer who's been committing code 10 plus days out of a 28 rolling 28-day period. All that means is these are the consistent developers who it's not just like I'm dropping in for a hackathon, right? Oh, this is a weekend product. This is not those types of developers. These are developers who are just committed, they're pushing the ecosystem forward. The other really important developer segment we look at is established developers. Established developers have been working in that specific ecosystem for 2+ years. This means that in many cases, they've been through a market cycle, right? They've been through the highs, they've been through the lows. And there's like often an overlap between full-time developers and established developers, but these are developers who stuck with the ecosystem, and established developers push something like 70% of the code across crypto. And so that's why it's also really important to look at them. Um, Back to Harry's earlier point, like if you click on Solana, you can, because Harry made this really interesting point that, these like pillar projects, right? Developers who never left. You can really see that. I want to illustrate like why full-time developers is a really important metric. So you can see that Solana had this huge dip sometime in 2023
Mhm.
in developers, but full-time developers is fairly flat, right?
Yes.
This is why this is a critical number. Is like if you just purely look at the total number of developers on Solana, or if you purely look at prices, I mean, I feel like it's kind of like what's happening, right? These numbers are tanking. But if you look at full-time developers, which is a really important segment, then you can see that yeah, it's fairly flat, right? People have stuck around.
Yes.
Same with the established developers, right? Established developers is growing on the right-hand side, that green one. It means that people keep entering into this 2+ year cohort into Solana. And so,
Okay.
another important segment.
So established
Um,
is 2 years, and full
yeah,
time is
yeah.
committing the steady code, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so those two signals, I would say, new developer interest is important because new developers are top of funnel. It kind of indicates how good is your marketing, how good is your
Mhm.
outreach, how good is your DevRel. Like so new developers are really important as an indicator of that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like who's pushing innovation on your chain? Who's creating the applications? That's when you look at full-time and established developers.
This is very cool. Did you guys check like stickiness rate or something between ecosystem or layer two or tooling? Because that would be also like some interesting kind of like statistic that I would like, because I'm always judging around kind of like so like before in the previous cycle it was all about product is definitely like why developers stick around, but now I feel and more it's all about accessibility of your ecosystem and how kind of like unique and authentic kind of like your
Mhm.
accessibility instrument are. So this stickiness is very important, and I always trying to understand, is there kind of like some stats or metric that we can look around these stickiness rates?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good suggestion. I think we can probably publish more directly addressing like retention and stickiness. The newcomer, emerging, established gets at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you see, for example, emerging decreasing, what that means is that the number of new developers that are converting into emerging, so
Mm-hmm.
emerging is 1 to 2 years, right? So new developers converting is lower now, and then the number of people who are graduating into the established. But it's you kind of have to like reason through it, so
Yeah.
it's not a straightforward metric. And so I think it's a good suggestion for us to publish something a little bit more straightforward that gets at the retention number.
I assume emergings dropped in all cases, right? Or do you see some of the ecosystem
Yeah,
drop?
emerging dropped in all cases. Yep, that's
Okay,
right.
okay, okay. No, makes sense, makes sense. I see we have literally like less than 15 minutes. I want to get to some spicy takes. Anything to add, Harry, before we're starting the section?
No, let's jump to the spicy takes.
So let's get me straightforward. So who are the winners here? let's like, winners in terms of like, building. I mean, I don't see many kind of like user facing dApps apart, stuff like Forecaster that we can debate, or Poly Markets that was definitely successful, but riding a big wave. But anything that you want to kind of like mention, like, who are the winners building cool, like, could be developer ecosystem, but in general also developer ecosystem that are a consequence with like user adoption.
I have some thoughts. I don't know if Harry, you wanna go first, or I can jump into it.
Sure, I can start and I'll save Maria's best last as well. So I think one that hasn't, well, we talked about Solana and Base, so I'll skip those. But one that was very interesting from the dev report, and we see that on the ground as well, is the Bitcoin developer accounts. I think it's been steadily rising. Obviously, as the price go up, as we see some activity that's very consistent, very steady. I think is pretty interesting. Another is actually some of the activities. I think for in emerging markets as a whole, right? So in Asia, Latam, Africa, we're seeing pretty tremendous growth in even open source as well as the closed source. And one quick thoughts there as well. I think a lot. Ooh, sorry, my cat is want to chime in here as well. I think he look at my activities and data all the time, so I'm sure he has something to say. But yeah, I think some of the developer activities in emerging markets as a whole has is also really interesting, and winners, those three regions, I would say don't sleep on them. I would also say I think consumer facing projects will also most likely get some benefits as more ecosystem focus on real adoption, liquidity, users, and so founders in that cycle are also winners now, and hopefully that trend continue with the cycle. Yeah, I'll let Maria go next.
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned DeFi, I think NFTs, ZK. One big winner for use cases is stablecoins. Stablecoin issuance is at an all-time high. I think it's actually, even so in the report we said like over 190 billion. It's actually over, like, I think it's over 200 billion now of stablecoins in existence. Totally nuts. And we also have this kind of like cool visualizations at the end of the stablecoin section where you kind of can look at where transactions. Oh yeah, this is another cool one, right? So
Nice.
there are different types of transaction sizes. Most of them is actually under 100, and so it starts to point at this payments transfer use case. And then if you keep, yeah, this one, right? So we can actually track all the time zones of all the transactions happening. And first of all, I think it's notable that, crypto and stablecoins is 24/7, right? Like there is always activity at all hours, meaning that there is global activity of stablecoin transfers. But they do increase at different times, and they kind of increase at these, like, the working hours between like Asia and Europe. And that's when there's like a noticeable peak. And this is in number of transactions, and then the next one is in transaction volume. And so transaction volume shifts slightly to the west compared to the number of transactions. What that means is that people in the Eastern Hemisphere are doing more transactions. People in the Western Hemisphere are doing fewer transactions, but higher value transactions. But either way, like stablecoin usage kind of spread all across the world. I think that's a huge winner for
So
us.
is this correct to say that, for example, emerging markets stablecoin use case are stronger, or no, not like it depends on the
It
volume,
seems
right?
so. I would say, yeah, I think it would seem to indicate that if you want to say stronger in terms of number of transactions, it does feel like, the eastern part of the world has just more transactions going on.
Yes, very interesting.
Yeah, super, super interesting. So stablecoins to me kind of comes up as a big winner. Another one is Eigenlayer, and again, the restaking sector. That one is a really interesting one where, yeah, so it grew over 30 billion to over 30 billion TVL. And if you kind of keep flashing forward a little bit, we talk about where these tokens come from, and a lot of them are being used in DeFi. And if you just if you kind of click forward in the, let's get to the eigenlayer. This talks about usage, and then okay, so this looks at eigenlayer ecosystem of developers. And so while liquid restaking tokens as a sector has grown tremendously in TVL, eigenlayer has also grown a lot of developers. And so now it's at 252 monthly active open source developers. And
for ABS developers, right?
Yeah, it includes eigenlayer and ABS developers, which is super cool, and kind of like this straight trend line up as well. So kind of a very interesting case of, this is the developer flywheel we're kind of talking about, right? Where, in the beginning, 2023, you literally had like, very, under 100, right? Like developers working on eigenlayer, and as these developers obviously created something with market demand. As market demand brought in more users and more capital, the number of developers has increased as well. And so eigenlayer is kind of this like small ecosystem where you can see that flywheel in real time.
Agree, yeah. I see that also it's reflected well with the kind of on the ground activity. We started this kind of ABS day last year run with eigenlayer, outlayer, and it's actually like you see also ABS developer appetite growing. And also like a big shout out to Nader if you're hearing us. Like I really like the fact that shouting out more ABS developers is definitely like a great narrative and a reality.
Yeah, he does a great job. Nader that's a great example of someone who's just such an evangelist for the ecosystem and connects with developers.
Nice. Okay, so sounds good. I think your answer already this kind of like spicy question about how we can include more closed source. Is there like some interest? I mean, obviously you will have to need like some kind of modules to feed this data, but I still like for me kind of like is a bit a closed box because I'm hearing statistics about kind of like closed source. TVLs that are actually quite crazy, but I don't know like if this is this something that we're looking to do in the future, or how we can kind of like stabilize to have an overview of the entire ecosystem of developers, because I think enterprise developers, they are also very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, some ecosystems are more open source than others. So some numbers are more indicative of developer activity than others, right? So for example, I was actually talking to Nader about this, but like he was indicating that most eigenlayer ecosystem developers, ABSs, they're required to be open source. And so there's just going to be more open source developers in the eigenlayer ecosystem if you look there. Cosmos ecosystem tends to be very, very open source, and that's their ethos. And so that's going to give you more open source developers. There are going to be certain chains that are more focused on gaming, right? So like Flow comes to mind as someone who's like a gaming ecosystem, and they're going to be a lot less open source, a lot more closed source activity. So depending on the ecosystem and depending on the chain, the amount of closed source and open source developer activity is going to be different.
Nice.
We have some ideas on how to get closed source ecosystem, closed source data. It's difficult because these code bases are locked. And unless these companies are willing to give us access to their code bases, which I am guessing a lot of them are not be willing to do that, we can't really do an accurate accounting of developers, right? And if we say just like, hey, just self-report, that's also not as accurate as what we have here, which is literally rolling up the number of developers based on the code commits that they have. And so there are definitely some compromises to gaining insights into closed source developers, but suffice to say, it's something we think about a lot in terms of how to get that data.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I wish there is some also like kind of like GitHub stats specific to like because you can still like track like maybe individual contributor working for enterprises, but obviously like the commits you cannot really get visibility.
Yeah, you can't get to the accuracy of monthly active developers, right? You can say something like how many developers overall, but if we want a real-time monthly active number, that's going to be very hard.
Super quickly, I see a couple of questions from Quater, and wonder if there is any interest data on metrics on RWA in the report. I'm just checking.
Good question. No, we didn't do anything specifically on RWAs, but I think stable coins, there's in the stablecoin section, we talk about how a lot of stable coins actually now incorporate treasuries, US treasuries, and stable coins now hold more US treasuries than Germany or Mexico,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
yeah. I saw a
um,
Germany treasury stat a couple of days ago also. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, which is absolutely nuts. It's slide 195 if you do the magnifying glass and want to get there. Yeah, this one.
very
Um,
impressive.
totally nuts. So that's kind of crazy. And then if you go on to the next slide, this talks about this the breakdown between fiat, hybrid, and decentralized. So fiat means the stable coins are actually like pegged with fiat dollars. So stable coins have actually brought a lot of dollars, 180 plus billion dollars on
Mhm.
chain. Um, yeah, those are some of our real world stats, although nothing kind of on like private credit or real estate, which I believe probably this question is more targeted
Nice,
toward.
nice. No, I think it's good. I mean, you are kind of answered already my question, Maria. Like, I mean, you will like in the future, like, what are the things that you want to include or adapt from the report? I think maybe more like disclosures, maybe the RWA. Anything else that you wish, like, you want to look in the future, or even Harry, what you think it will be relevant for like future
Yeah,
reports?
I'd love to hear what is the best, definitely hear you on the closed source. RWAs, I do think would be really interesting sector to include. Very open to suggestions. So actually, if you do have suggestions, feel free to DM me on Twitter at Maria Shen, and we'll keep that in mind as we do the analysis every year. We're a small team, so it's not like there's not a lot of like red tape around this analysis.
Yeah, I really like that you guys are still very like say hands-on also like on trying to understand developers because this is the key also to run a great kind of like investment thesis. Anything that you want to add, Ari, that I see we're almost on time here. Oh, I know. I want to ask you because you guys are very big on Asia in general. Like you see the spike on Asia. Like, do you see the trend? Or what are the key takeaways, right? We're definitely pushing a lot of more activation for 2025. But should everyone kind of like go to Asia? All this kind of like, what is your pickup on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in Asia, right? That's
Mhm.
one of the major takeaways I've had when talking about concerns around going to Asia. Obviously, Asia has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, developer community, both in Web 2 and now Web 3. But my answer is still don't sleep on Asia. Even though there's noise, the rewards is exponentially higher, right? It's worth the efforts. It's very noteworthy that a lot of the countries in Asia don't have an open source culture, right? So even on the electric
Yeah,
report, dev report is still number one now. But like I have one data point here from 36KR is a famous tech media in China, and one statistics was 68% of the Chinese earn $0 income from open source work. I think, and if we talk about little under $100, it's almost 90%. So there's just no any monetary incentive for a lot of the open source work as well. And this is dedicated open source work. Then it's very difficult, and on top of the culture piece, it's
Mhm.
very difficult to accurately reflect what's going on. So I would even say there's even more devs than we think, probably in Web3 that come from Asia,
Mhm.
that are either part of the closed source repo that's in gaming, like Maria mentioned, so it's fastly growing. There's a lot more devs, probably even that's been depicted here. So I think the takeaway here is don't sleep on Asia. There's still a lot more activities coming. It's quickly growing. The next step or the action item here, I think, is actually diving into the communities, and
Mhm.
because one data point we have collected through survey, which is actually think Electric Capital could also do, obviously outside of the the GitHub repo, that we've been doing
yep,
discovery calls every week since we
Mhm.
started, and we distribute some surveys, and one of the biggest things we found out is most of the people actually not only rely on self-learning, but also rely on Web3 communities to get involved, especially developers. So essentially accessing the information via developer community, talking to them on the ground. I've seen a lot of the emerging ecosystem essentially make a list of like 100 developer communities they want to talk to. They run events, activations, IRL, just talk to these people in the hundreds of counts, and then just doing the on the ground push. And then as more developers know about the ecosystem, as they improve more on the developer accessibility side, more developers will want to build. And over time, they become intermediate level, advanced level, to Maria's point, full-time developers, right? That's truly driving the innovation. To us, I think that would be one of the takeaway on breaking into Asia, because there's so many developer communities there, and it's very easy to locate a couple of leaders in the space.
Okay, that's yeah, I agree with that. Also, like the hands-on side, I think also like you guys will do much more as an educational platform. I assume like you will start to kind of like build some of the internal like tooling. Like, I think you already provide, like browser IDEs for learning, and so sounds good. I think we're on time. I just wanna big shout out also to you guys. Thank you so much. We're really like honored to have you guys on kind of this video podcast today. But these insights are extremely valuable, I think, for more use case that kind of like we want to approach, for more the builders hearing us. But we are definitely like here to stay. I'm excited to see also kind of like the builder narrative is still strong. And yeah, anything to add before we're closing up?
No, I don't think so. Thanks so much for having us.
Awesome.
This is really
Awesome.
fun.
Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Thanks
Thanks
so
so
much,
much.
Maria. Thanks so much, Harry. See you guys. Cheers, cheers, cheers. Bye,
Bye.
bye.